Hey guys, Veronica here. I'm in the field today and I want to talk about soil temperature. So this was something that I sort of overlooked for a really long time, as most of these things are, which is why I'm making the videos for you. But soil temperature is super important. So I think a lot of us, when we start planting for spring, we're looking at the ambient temperature, last frost date, maybe like your daytime high, your nighttime low, and kind of trying to fit our seed planting or our transplanting out into that window, when in fact soil temperature is just as, if not more, important than any of those factors. Maybe not last frost. If there's still snow falling, like, that's probably going to be your most important indicator. But if there's not, then what I recommend doing is getting a little digital thermometer. This was about $5 on the sale rack at the hardware store. You can find them on kitchen aisles, on barbecue aisles. It was an end of summer clearance item. And get a little digital thermometer that you can allocate to the garden and keep in your greenhouse or garden supplies. And then walk around at this time of year, and every so often, just stick that thermometer right in the soil and look at the temperature. And depending on what this readout says is what I'm going to be thinking about planting right now. So if it says that it's in the 40s, that's the right temperature for things like all of these winter peas. They were planted, this cover crop, in the 40s. It's also the right temperature for things like lettuce and kale and spinach and a lot of like the cooler season greens. If you're looking at the 50s, and this is not, we're in the 60s now, but if you're looking at the 50s, we're talking about onions. We have some onions in here that went in when it was a little cooler and they're starting to perk up. They were bargain basement at the nursery for $1 for like a bunch of 100, so I had to get them, of course. But we'll see if they perk up a little bit more. But your onions, your leeks, your turnips, Swiss chard, some of the greens that can withstand a little bit more heat throughout the summer. Now when we're moving up into the 60s, and this says 62.4, then we're looking at things like brassicas, carrots, beets, sometimes beans. Beans do all right in that temperature. Sometimes you get a little bit of, it gets a little colder and in the air temperature, and it doesn't always work, but I put beans in the 60s. And then you gotta wait until this says 70s before you plant things like squash, melons, cucumbers, tomatoes, peppers, corn, like all your summer veggies, basically. All of these temperatures, of course, are in Fahrenheit because I live in the United States and I have not figured out Celsius for this sort of stuff. I can do it for cooking for some reason, but not for gardening. So work on that. It's a lower temperature thing, but this does have a Celsius button. So that 62 will become, I don't know. We're going to learn Celsius together. The 62 is 16.8. So I don't know what the conversion is, but all of that is to say, these little squash, they got planted out early. And they were planted out while it's still 60, and squash likes a 70-degree temperature. And so what I've been noticing with these is sometimes the leaves have been drooping. They're a little more yellow. There's another variety. You can see like there's some veining that you wouldn't normally notice if it was warm enough. I've noticed a little bit of mildew on a couple that I've popped those leaves off, but I'm just going to keep an eye on them, and hopefully the soil warms up over the next week. Now, what happens if you plant at the wrong temperature? So if you put a seed in that it's too cold for that seed to germinate, it's either not going to germinate or it's going to germinate very slowly, and you run the risk of that seed getting either like a fungal issue, it could just be taken out by mold or mildew, it could potentially get some other form of disease. It's going to sprout so slowly and it's not going to come up with a lot of vigor, and we want to set our seeds up for success and set our gardens up for success. So checking your soil temperature will help set you up for success, and it helps kind of eliminate that variable in terms of why did this not grow, why doesn't this work out. So it's something that I'm going to be doing a lot more of this year too, because I'm doing a lot of direct seeding in the field behind me. We're going to do some mowing of this cover crop over the next week or so once I get all of these weeds identified and figure out, what the native plants are and what they're trying to say, and that might be next week's video for all I know. But yeah, it's just one of those things where I think that, if you grow peppers and tomatoes and you're starting stuff early, then a lot of times you're putting either a heat mat under them or some sort of modified like Christmas lights, or keeping it in a warm place on top of your refrigerator. There's all these tricks like make it warm so that the seeds will germinate. And that knowledge doesn't always get carried out to the garden when we're putting seeds in. So every seed has an ideal germination temperature. It's a really good idea to look up, if it doesn't say on the seed pack, to look up what the ideal soil temperature is for that seed, so that that seed will germinate and grow for you. And I highly recommend that. The direct seed I'm doing is landrace seed, and so I don't want to lose any of that because it's very limited genetics at this point. We're looking to grow them out and save them so that we have these very resilient and strong and robust plants. But because this is the first generation of them that I'm going to grow in this space, then I need to make sure that I can kind of dial in as many variables as possible, since the native soil is like this goopy clay, and since I don't want to add a lot of compost because that will make them a little less robust and resilient, I really have to pay attention to things like soil temperature and like pH and there's like all of these little markers that will change the outcome depending on if I pay attention to them or not. So check your soil temperature. If you have any questions about this process, that's, I think, pretty straightforward, but if it's not, then leave me questions in the comments below. Also, if you cannot find the temperature for some vegetable or fruit or herb that you're trying to grow, I can try and help you figure that out. And so yeah, leave me your questions and we'll try and see if we can't get those sorted. Follow me on Instagram at FlavorKit as I kind of work through this process and more over the next couple of weeks as we get deeper into spring. And until next time, happy gardening. Oh yeah, hit that subscribe button and happy gardening.